So, all you naval enthusiasts out there, I have something very exciting for you. I went to the USS New Jersey while she was still in dry dock, and I had a private tour of going underneath her while she's going under the retrofits and whatnot. Not even retrofits, just maintenance, scheduled maintenance. Um, it was very fun. I have a lot of pictures and a lot of videos that I'd like to share with you all. And I'm going to show you my experience of being underneath USS New Jersey. I couldn't go in it, unfortunately. That wasn't the thing I could do here. They have that closed off, but I'll have it. I'll be able to do that another time. It's not too far from where I live. But without further ado, let's see what the tour guide has to say. Ryan, I'm not going to try and pronounce that last name. Sorry, Ryan. You're a great guy, though.
It is 974 feet long, 50 feet deep, and at the bottom it's only 114 feet wide. It's about 6 feet wider than the ship. It is keystone shaped, however, so at the top it's 144 feet wide. It holds 37 million gallons of water, and its 3 main pumps can dewater it in an hour and a half. Now, we are not going to flood it and dewater it in that much time. That is not great for dropping a ship that quickly. And I'll talk more about that process later on. So here you can see some of the process of how we got the ship into the dry dock. So the tugboats brought us to the front of the dry dock. I guess I should start at the beginning. Dry dock's filled with water, right? So the tugboats bring us to the front of the dry dock. And then, of course, they can't come in. The thing's barely wider than the ship. So they use the crane to drop a big, thick blue rope onto the back of the ship. Tied it off there, ran it right through this point and across the street to that capstan. They actually had the police come out and shut down the road here for the couple hours that the ship was being brought in so that they could do this evolution. So the capstan spins, and that just pulls the rope and it drags the whole ship in. Any questions here before we go down? All right, so we're gonna go around this group and then down those stairs. What they're doing is boxing the outboard shafts. Essentially, they're going to weld a ring from the through hull opening where the shaft passes through the hull to the propeller shaft. It's gonna do 2 things for us. It's gonna keep the propeller shafts dry so water isn't leaking into the ship. And it's going to help support the propeller shafts. There is a rope backing wrapped around them on the inside, and it's designed for a propeller spinning, distributing its weight relatively equally. Our propellers have not been on since 1990, so they've just been sitting, crushing the rope down and leaving an opening at the top. So by welding that box around it, it's going to help support those shafts and prevent that from happening. It's built-in suspenders, and a lot of museums believe their propellers would do that. And it means that that box has to fail, and then the pack has to fail before we'll start to get water inside the ship. So it's one of those things, since we're not going to dry dock for another 30 years, and that's far less frequent than normal for a museum ship, that we're doing as an extra of that. It was not in our original plan. So while we're here, I wanted to point out this keel block that obviously the ship doesn't sit on. Why is it here? How do we figure out where the ship is in the dry dock to set her down on the blocks properly? They do it the same way that the ancient Greeks and Romans did thousands of years ago. They essentially had a float coming off of this, and they hung a plumb bob off of the stern. They have the same thing at the bow, a float and a plumb bob. So there's just a guy on the wing wall there, and when he sees the two match up, he's like, all right, that's where she's supposed to go, set her down. Yeah, you'd think it would be a little bit more state-of-the-art. It's one of my favorite things about dry docking a historic vessel in a historic dry dock. Like, we get to see the traditional way of doing it. All right, so next we're going to head down the Holland Tunnel. turn about 36.5 degrees in either direction. They are towed inwards about 2 degrees. The helmsman usually would not take them all the way to like 36.5. You usually stop around 33, 34, just because you don't want them to jam at the extreme ends. But in an emergency, you can do that. You can also manually close them inwards like that to stop the ship. Allegedly, you can do that in 600 feet as opposed to 2.5 miles. Yeah. We have 4 propellers. Each one is about 20 tons. They're made out of manganese bronze, which is super corrosion resistant, but kind of turns the ship into a battery, and I'll talk more about that later on. The inboard propellers are about 17.3 feet in diameter. The outboard propellers are about 18 feet in diameter. The inboard propellers are 5-bladed. The outboard are 4-bladed. So the difference in the diameters is to get similar surface area so that they're moving the same amount of water. The U.S. Navy on its fast battleships had massive issues with vibration. And so throughout World War II, they were constantly trying to improve that. And the best system that they found was this, with the 5-bladed on the inboards and the 4-bladed on the outboards. The best speculation I've heard most recently is you have a lot of vibration on the inboard shafts because of the skegs. So you've got water that are hitting the propeller blades, except at the top and the bottom where the skegs are. So the propeller is going from biting water, flowing water, to nothing. And so that might be causing enough of a vibration that's transmitting through the hull. That led the Navy to try and fix it by installing extra bearings back here in what were void spaces in the twin docking keels. The bearings used lignin biting or ironwood as the piece that was in contact with the metal. Ironwood is a naturally oily tropical hardwood, and it can be lubricated with salt water. So the Navy drilled a couple hundred holes in these skegs in what had been watertight voids to turn it into a free flood area. It's generally considered a bad thing to let water into the inside of a ship, and that caused some corrosion issues later on. And we believe that the Navy only did this on New Jersey, and it was so awful that they didn't do it on other ships. But this is my first aisle that I've gotten to see out of the water, so I'm not sure quite how much of this exists on the other ships or not. The big plates that you see are because 2 sections of propeller shaft couple there, where the last section of line shaft couples to the tail shaft. So it's a bolted flange. So you have to remove that plate and unbolt that flange to pull the sections of propeller shaft out the back of the ship if, say, one gets damaged in the repair. So I believe that that whole access plate should be on all the aisles. But all the extra holes and that extra little plate might be a New Jersey specific thing. Any questions here before we keep going? So the ship has 5 keels, a bilge keel on each side, the twin docking keels, and then this is what you actually think of with the term keel, the center line spine of the ship, the first piece that's laid. So this is the aft end of the keel. When we go forward, I'll show you the forward end of the keel. Ready for spooky stories with Uncle Ryan? There is 45,000 tons of battleship over your head right now. If something goes wrong, you won't feel a thing. So, the ship is being supported by 302 of these 4-ton keel blocks. The Navy plan calls for 429 of them, and it requires the ship to be fleeted twice. Fleeting is how we paint the area that's being covered by the blocks. So, obviously we can't paint that now. In mid-May, when the project's mostly over, we will reflood the dry dock, we will float the ship 4 feet forward, and we'll set the ship back down again. and then that will cover up areas we've already painted, and it will expose all the areas currently under the blocks. When we reached out to the shipyard and said, hey, we need to dry dock the battleship, you've got the only dry dock nearby that can take us, here's the blocking plan, can we do this? They freaked out initially because they did not have 429 keel blocks. So we re-engineered the plan to get it down to these 302. Essentially, the big issue with the Iowa-class battleships is not the size of the dry dock. There are plenty of dry docks out there that are the right size to accommodate us. The big issue is the weight of the ships and where that weight is concentrated. So the gun turrets are pretty far forward, pretty far aft. That concentrates the weight down into this 4-foot square cube that's being pushed into the foundation here. Many dry docks, even though they can support heavy ships and ships this size, cannot support that much weight concentrated in one area. So we had to really carefully redesign the blocking plan, and essentially to reduce the number of blocks, we got blocks with bigger bases. The problem is we can't make the caps too much larger because the caps are supposed to sit in specific places where there are frames overhead, specific strakes, things like that, so they don't punch through the ship in areas that aren't as strong as others. So you saw that back aft. I don't see any around here actually, so bad place to talk about it. Oh no, outboard there. You see how there is a wider base than the wooden cap on top. So that means that you've got the same amount of surface area on the ship, and it comes down, and then it is being transmitted to a larger surface area that's then being transmitted down in the foundation. So that is how we were able to support the same amount of weight without cracking the dry dock. And that's also going to allow us to only have to fleet the ship one time instead of twice, which saves us $150,000. Which is a good thing because we have found some stuff we weren't expecting. I'll point them out later. That has led us to increase the costs of other things. Let's see, this plate above me is still the keel, 2 inches thick of STS steel, 80 pounds per square foot. So this runs pretty much the whole length of the ship. We'll get there later. We'll talk about some other. Let's do some archaeology together. As built, much of the hull of the ship is riveted. And you can see rivets here and up here. Notice there are no rivets on this part of the ship. In fact, we can see a weld bead. So we know that this was a repair that was made sometime during the ship's career. Welding is very dangerous on a riveted hull ship. Check this out. Let's see. If you look at these rivets up here, they're just circles, right? But you look at these and they look like spirals. Because they welded here, they heated up the steel and made it expand. And when it expanded, the 40-year-old rivet popped. We don't really rivet stuff in this country anymore. So they're like, okay, no problem. We will weld over that rivet. Hey, that made the next rivet pop. And look, it goes all the way down the line to about here. We finally get to a rivet that's still intact. So we're trying to avoid welding on the hull as much as possible because in the 1980s, they replaced something like 80,000 rivets every time the ship went into dry dock because they were planning on fixing a few, and then as they fixed them, these are cast out of Class B metal. They are hollow on the inside, and so the Navy filled them with balsa wood, pine tar, and pitch. We think that when they did these weld repairs in the 80s, they got rid of all of that stuff, but we're not entirely sure yet. One of the projects is to air test these bilge keels, make sure that they're still watertight. That might reveal if they have anything in them or not. Come back for a tour in a couple of weeks, and I'll be able to tell you the answer.
While we were under there, we also saw like a bunch of these patched up holes. Those were I did not know about these, and that's saying something because there's not a lot that I don't know about warships. But I guess this makes a lot of sense. They had hundreds of these holes underneath the ship. They were to bring in water for the boilers and for the engines and whatnot. They were patched up though at some point. Yeah, neat stuff.
There's heat exchangers to keep the fuel up. The bunker fuel, they're not in there anymore, right?
It varies by tank. Some of them do still have the radiator, but not all of them. So I don't know what criteria the Navy used when they were stripping them out or leaving them in place. Oh yeah, I'll tell you about that in a minute. That's 1921
Not worrying
drydock.
at all. Not worrying in the slightest.
Well, my favorite is where the wing walls are leaking.
Oh, you got a little sequence going? Oh, that's not sequence. That's float.
Yeah, the biggest lie about dry docking a ship is the word dry. It never gets dry. Here you can see our boot topping. It's about 6 feet tall. So the water line is about halfway up that, the normal one. Well, the light load normal one. Normally our boot topping should be higher up, but because the ship sits higher in the water because she's unladen, we painted it down lower so it looks less weird. The ship looks more like she would in active service. We are only painting the below water part of the ship here. We are only doing work in dry dock on the below water exterior of the ship. When we get back to Camden, we're going to spend another $600,000 or $700,000 to paint the above water part of the ship. And that's what the rings welded on the hull are up here. Those are original to the ship's design. Along the sides of the ship, they're pretty flat, so you can bring a paint float up to it and just pass a line down from up on deck. But here, because the bow overhangs so far, you pass a line down and the paint float won't be close to the hull of the ship. So they have to tie off to these rings along the side when they're painting. Any other questions here? We're about... Oh, yeah, it's mostly oil canning. As the metal expands, when it gets hot, it's got nowhere to go but in. So it forms these dents around the frames and the longitudinals. That one, we think they dropped the anchor on it.
That big right there?
Yeah, the big one right here at the bow. Because that steel is too thick to oil can.
How thick is it there?
What strike are we on? 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is D strike. It's about 3/4 of an inch. So, when these ships were built, it cost about $150 million in 1940s dollars. It's about $2 billion today. The Navy decided that spending that much money on a ship, they did not want to just optimize it for surface combat. They wanted her to be able to do some of everything. She can launch aircraft. She's got anti-aircraft guns. She's got, of course, the big guns that can be used for shore bombardment or enemy ships. They can even use her for a minesweeper. The Navy insisted that she be usable for a minesweeper. This is another feature that's unique to New Jersey. In 1987, they cut off the original mine-sweeping gear from New Jersey. But they left it on the other Iowas. In 1987, the Navy had a brief flash of clarity. Like, we can't use the $2 billion ship as a minesweeper. Plus, it's causing all this extra corrosion up at the bow. Cut it off, replace it. And then they decided, let's send the battleships into the Persian Gulf, where Iran and Iraq have just dropped a ton of mines. And we can use them as minesweepers. Do not take it off of the other 3 Iowas. So this circle here is pretty much the last evidence of our paravane equipment you can see here. There would be like a giant pad eye that comes out like this, and out of the bullnose a chain would come all the way down through this, through a pipe in the peak tank, and back up to the main deck where it would tie back into itself like a conveyor belt. So you would attach the paravanes on the deck. The paravanes look like underwater airplanes, essentially. You attach the paravanes on deck, you run the conveyor belt to bring the paravanes down below water, and then as the ship moves through the water, they're attached by chains, they'll sort of swing out to either side. When they swing out to either side, they're then still connected to the ship by a chain. So those chains will catch the chains that anchor sea mines to the sea floor and drag them towards the ship, so that a Marine on deck can shoot them with a rifle. And that is how you use a battleship as a minesweeper. But they removed that ability, and then they sent the ship to the Persian Gulf in 1989. And they decided they still wanted her to be a minesweeper. So they assigned an underwater demolition team to the battleship. So these dudes would jump off of the ship, swim over to a mine, attach a plastic explosive, and then swim away. And that's how you use a battleship as a minesweeper in the modern era. The problem is, Congress will fund glamorous things like battleships. They do not build minesweepers. The US Navy has never had enough. Your tax dollars at work.
How'd they get the chain in there? Or was it permanently attached?
It was permanently attached. It did have a coupling, so you could detach it if you needed to like remove it for maintenance and things like that. But like during World War II, she permanently had a chain running down the bow.
They weren't completely done with it yet. They still had like a bit of a ways to go. They still had like another month. Here you can see the original black paint of New Jersey's underhull.
Caisson's really, really cool. Essentially, it is keystone shaped just like the drydock. It's wider at the top than at the bottom. And this means when you pump the water out from inside the caisson, it will float. And when it floats up, it then creates enough space that it can be pulled out of the gap. When you want to put the caisson back in place, you pump water into it and it sinks down and closes that gap and seals the opening here. I always assumed that it would be attached by hinges or roll up or down. No, completely free floating. When we want to take the ship out of here, a tugboat will grab the caisson, take it to another pier entirely. They'll pull the ship out and then they'll bring the caisson back. The only thing that's holding that caisson in place right now is the water pressure of the Delaware River on the outside. When we want to remove it, we fill the dry dock with 37 million gallons of water, and the water pressure in here is now equal to the water pressure out there. At that point, you can pull the caisson out of the way. The caisson has a gasket on it, and it seats up against the dry dock. The problem is, as the water runs into the dry dock, it brings in all sorts of silt, debris, other gunk like that. So when this caisson tries to seal up against the gasket, the debris hinders that from being a perfect fit. So you can see that there's a series of leaks around the edges of it. Perfectly fine. It's just like the sump in your basement. This area out here is a little bit deeper than the rest of the dry dock, so the water collects there. And there's a smaller pump there that circulates it back into the river. So just like a sump pump. This gap is also great for if you need to do work on your sonar dome or your rudders. because you could position that part of the ship over the gap, and then it got room to drop down for removal or reinstallation. So every time previously New Jersey has been in this dry dock, she has been in bow first with the rudders over this so they could do work on them. This is the first time that we've been in stern first, because we're not doing any work on the rudders.
And that basically wraps up my tour of the USS New Jersey. A lot of fun, if not a little bit on the expensive side. Although, makes sense, these don't come cheap at all. But yeah, no, very neat stuff. While I was there, I also saw a couple of Ticonderoga cruisers just hanging out there. Two of them seem to be pretty okay. I think the third one, the one that I just showed, was in decommissioning process. And there was also the USS John F. Kennedy there too, which I was not expecting to see. It's certainly seen better days, but man, oh man, was that a cool tour. I'm not too far from the Intrepid, and I do have pictures of that too. So if you guys are interested, I could also put together a little bit of montage of my photos from there too, if you're interested. But yeah, no, just wanted to share my experience.